June 1940. Hitler controlled almost all of Europe. France had fallen. Poland, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, all had collapsed. Britain stood alone, and the world believed that the greatest empire in history was being built. But 5 years later, in 1945, everything lay in ruins. So how did Hitler lose? When he was on the verge of conquering the world, where did he go wrong? The story I'm about to tell you is the greatest military defeat in history. And behind this defeat lies the decisions of a single man. 1933. Germany was still struggling to recover from the wounds of the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles had crushed the country. Unemployment was at record levels. Inflation had devastated the economy. Adolf Hitler stepped onto the stage. Charismatic, passionate, and extraordinarily dangerous. When he came to power in 1933, he began rearming Germany. Secretly at first, then openly. He defied Versailles at every turn. In 1935, he took back the Saar region. In 1936, he occupied the Rhineland. In 1938, he annexed Austria. In 1939, he dismembered Czechoslovakia. And each time, the Western powers stayed silent. Their hunger for peace had made them blind. These successes gave Hitler something: confidence. Exaggerated, uncontrolled confidence. September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. The Germans had developed a new tactic of warfare: blitzkrieg, lightning war, armored divisions, motorized infantry, and air support moving together, shattering enemy defenses before they could react. Poland collapsed in 35 days. In the spring of 1940, the assault on Western Europe began. Denmark fell in a single day. Norwegian resistance broke in just a few weeks. Then came the decisive blow: France. The French trusted the Maginot Line, a vast chain of fortifications along their eastern border. But the Germans bypassed it entirely, advancing through the Ardennes forest, a route the French had considered impassable. The French front collapsed. In June 1940, France surrendered. German soldiers marched through the streets of Paris. Looking at the map, the picture was staggering. From the Atlantic coast to Poland, from Norway to the Mediterranean, Germany was in control. It was one of the fastest continental conquests in history. May 1940. The British Expeditionary Force and French troops were trapped at the port of Dunkirk. 330,000 soldiers. Their backs were to the sea. Their destruction was days away. German tanks were only a few kilometers distant. They awaited Hitler's order, and Hitler stopped. General von Rundstedt had advised halting the tanks. The engines needed maintenance. The Luftwaffe would take over. Hitler agreed. This decision remains one of the greatest mysteries in history. Perhaps he wanted to offer Britain a separate peace. Perhaps he trusted the Luftwaffe too much. But the result was this: over 9 days, more than 900 civilian and military vessels, including fishing boats, rescued 338,000 soldiers. Those same soldiers would land at Normandy 4 years later. Summer 1940, France had fallen. Britain stood alone. Hitler wanted to invade Britain, but first he needed air superiority. The Royal Navy still dominated the seas. Without control of the skies, an invasion was impossible. The Luftwaffe was unleashed over British skies. Fierce battles were fought, the legendary Spitfires and Hurricanes. RAF pilots defended with everything they had. The Germans were targeting radar stations and airfields, the right strategy, yielding real results. The RAF was beginning to wear down. Then Hitler made a critical mistake. A German aircraft accidentally bombed London. Britain retaliated by bombing Berlin. Hitler responded with fury. He shifted targets from RAF radar stations to London itself. This switch gave the RAF breathing room. Radar systems and bases survived. The RAF recovered. In September 1940, Hitler indefinitely postponed the invasion of Britain. It was his first great defeat, but he refused to acknowledge it. June 22, 1941, in the early hours of morning, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa. 3.8 million soldiers, the largest land invasion in history. Three massive columns, Army Group North toward Leningrad, Army Group Center toward Moscow, Army Group South toward Ukraine. Stalin had not expected the attack. The Soviet army was caught completely unprepared. The first weeks were catastrophic. The Soviets lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. German forces advanced hundreds of kilometers within weeks. But here Hitler made his second great mistake. His generals wanted to focus on Moscow. If they took the capital, the war would end. Looking at the map, it made sense. One decisive blow to the heart. Hitler, however, divided his forces. He halted Army Group Center. He diverted troops northward for Leningrad, southward for Ukraine. This decision delayed the critical assault on Moscow by critical weeks. They lost the summer months, and winter came. In October, the Germans came within 20 kilometers of Moscow. They could see the city skyline. But at that moment, temperatures plunged to -30, -40 degrees Celsius. Germany was not prepared for winter warfare. Soldiers were in summer uniforms. Weapons had frozen. Vehicles wouldn't start. Engine oil solidified in the cold. The Red Army, meanwhile, brought reinforcements from Siberia. Those soldiers were accustomed to brutal cold. They held the defensive line. The Germans were forced to retreat. Summer 1942. Hitler made his next move. This time he turned south, aiming for the oil fields of the Caucasus. And along the way lay a major target, Stalingrad. It was a strategically vital city. It sat astride the Volga River, the backbone of the Southern Front. But for Hitler, it meant something more. It carried Stalin's name. The German Sixth Army entered the city, but the Soviets fought for every street, every building, every basement. Urban warfare was where the Germans were weakest. Their massive tank formations were useless in narrow streets. In November 1942, the Soviets launched their counteroffensive, Operation Uranus. They struck from both north and south simultaneously. They encircled the German Sixth Army completely. 330,000 soldiers were trapped. Hitler refused to give the order to retreat. Hold Stalingrad, no withdrawal. Surrender was not an option. Every time his generals requested permission to break out, he refused. He attempted an air supply corridor. It wasn't enough. A relief operation failed. February 1943. General Paulus surrendered, defying Hitler's orders. 91,000 soldiers were taken prisoner. Many were sent to Siberia. Only a fraction ever returned. This was the point of no return for Germany. In parallel, a separate story was unfolding in North Africa. Field Marshal Rommel, the Desert Fox, had performed brilliantly in North Africa. He advanced from Libya deep into Egypt. He reached El Alamein, just one step from the Suez Canal, but his supply lines had become dangerously overextended. Fuel, ammunition, food, all were running short. Britain, meanwhile, received continuous reinforcements by sea. Britain's Eighth Army under Montgomery launched its counteroffensive. The Second Battle of El Alamein broke Rommel's front wide open. In early 1943, German and Italian forces in North Africa surrendered. 250,000 soldiers taken prisoner, even more than at Stalingrad. The gateway to the Mediterranean had closed. June 6, 1944. Early morning, the shores of Normandy. The largest amphibious landing operation ever seen in history began. But first, the Allies had deceived the Germans masterfully. They created a phantom army under Patton's command. German intelligence was convinced the real landing would come at Calais. In a single day, 156,000 soldiers landed at Normandy across 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Hitler was not informed that morning. He was asleep. His aides didn't dare wake him. Until midday, the reserve forces were not dispatched. These delays gave the Allies the time they needed to secure the beachhead. Then France slowly began to be liberated. Paris was free by August 1944. Now the Germans were trapped on 2 fronts simultaneously, the Soviets closing in from the east, the Allies advancing from the west. German resources were running out. So what lay beneath all these military defeats? Hitler was not a military genius. It's important to acknowledge that plainly. His generals could not bring him bad news. Those who did were relieved of command, sent into exile. This severed Hitler from reality. He spoke over maps, but he could not see the truth at the front. At Dunkirk, he let 330,000 soldiers escape. In Barbarossa, he divided his forces and failed to prepare for winter. At Stalingrad, he refused the order to retreat. At Normandy, his response came too late. Each mistake built on the last. After 1941, he fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. Soviets, Britain, America, the Mediterranean. Germany's industrial capacity could not sustain this. By 1944, American production had reached 8 times that of Germany. Hitler underestimated logistics, economics, and industrial capacity. Modern warfare was now won in the factory, and they were losing that war. April 1945, Berlin was burning. Soviet forces had entered the city. Allied forces were closing in from the west. Of Hitler's empire, only a ruined capital remained. April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in his Berlin bunker. May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Why did Hitler lose? At Dunkirk, he allowed 330,000 soldiers to escape. In Barbarossa, he divided his forces and failed to prepare for winter. At Stalingrad, he refused to order a retreat. At Normandy, his response came too late. But beneath all of this lies this truth. He set a goal that far exceeded human capacity. And in pursuing that goal, he replaced reason, strategy, and realism with blind faith. The bloodiest conflict in history ended with 70 to 85 million dead. Cities were destroyed, generations were erased, continents were torn apart. And the responsibility for that destruction rests in large part on the mistakes of a single man.